Thank you for having me here. It's a delight and a joy to be here and to be a part of your Communication Week 2017, to get to interact with you about my passion, the communication discipline, and your passion, and to explore issues together with others like Dr. Edwards, who spoke yesterday, and Dr. Myers, who's going to speak tomorrow. Anyway, the focus of my remarks today are going to be about what does privacy mean in the age of digital communication. It's been what I've focused my scholarly research on over the last 10 years. Think about how much things have changed in the arena of digital communication in the last 10 years. We've had a lot of advances. Twitter and YouTube didn't even exist 10 years ago, and Facebook was a college-only application. Now these varied forms of interactive communication are a vital part of engagement in our daily lives. So my time here today, I'd like to accomplish 4 things. The first is that I'd like to begin by highlighting the range of ways that privacy and digital communication intersect and present issues for us to explore. Then I'd like to discuss a theoretical framework that can help integrate these issues. Like Dr. Wall said, that's primarily communication privacy management theory. Then I want to highlight some of the work that I and others have done related to privacy regulation and disclosure through social media. And I'd like to finish, I think I got ahead of myself somewhere. There we go. Okay, this is where we're supposed to be. Now I'm back on track. Then I'd like to end with a few macro issues that I think are on the horizon as we think about the future of privacy, disclosure, and digital communication. So let's look at some of the ways that privacy intersects and impacts our daily lives. Over the last couple weeks, I've been clipping headlines and looking at issues that are related to privacy regulation and disclosure in our lives. I've grouped them into these 5 areas, but these aren't mutually exclusive areas. I very well could have put some of these articles and issues in one area or another. But issues of privacy regulation and disclosure and digital communication are a part of the relational and family arena, the organizational and business arena, the governmental and political area, the health and healthcare arena, and the mediated and mass communication area. So let's look at some of these in a little bit more depth. In the family arena, there's good debate now and discussion about the extent to which parents should spy on versus allow their children to have autonomy in terms of who they connect with through digital communication. Some families also negotiate rules for use of cell phones and digital devices. You probably wouldn't be surprised to see the headline in here that parents aren't really all that great at regulating what they say about their children online. My sister-in-law is a great example of this. She posts pictures about her kids in the tub and talks about all sorts of things that happen with them on a regular, pretty frequent basis. And I think, man, those kids, when they get older, they're going to have quite a time negotiating access to the digital book and all the footprints that she's been posting. The articles in the middle of the screen highlight how kids at younger and younger ages are gravitating towards social media engagement. Many are already a part of it before they legally should be, sharing information about themselves and talking to people. So how do parents interact and engage kids in their social media pursuits is really an important privacy issue of consideration. Finally, the last 3 stories are about what do family members do with the digital assets of a deceased family member. Some parents want access to that deceased member's pictures and posts. The lines of ownership are blurred in common lives. Let's think about you in here. How many of you would be comfortable with your parents combing through everything that you've chatted about and posted through Facebook? How many of you would be comfortable and wouldn't have any problems with your family having access to those aspects of your life? How many of you are somewhere in the middle, like you want to do a little bit of scrubbing before? Okay, all right. So we see all sorts of differences in user behavior and preferences. I think these articles demonstrate just a few of the ways that family and relational considerations relate to privacy and digital communication today. This is quite the mix. The second area is in the organizational and business arena. Harvesting big data is a big trend in the business arena. Organizations want to know just how much you're willing to share about yourself for perks that they might provide. Disney's a great example of this. They know where each user in their park is at any time, how much time you spend in the bathroom, waiting in lines. If you spend a while in an area and it's hot, they'll send like Mickey or Donald over, right? So these bands produce gobs and gobs of data. And so the issue becomes, how do they use it? But we found in terms of people's preferences that when it improves entertainment and the vacation experience, people are happy to exchange their privacy for these types of benefits that they get. The two articles at the bottom show interesting applications. The one on the far right discusses how some colleges are paying attention to each student's digital footprints, swipe patterns, internet usage trends, and to see when they might be depressed, struggling, or need additional support that then they try to initiate based off of this data. The article on the far left, we learned companies like Target notice slight changes in user behavior, buying patterns, and know with pretty good accuracy how that translates to life changes. The article talks about how a father went into Target. He was upset that his underage daughter was getting all these advertisements and coupons about babies. And so he went in and bawled them out and came back and told his wife and his daughter what he had done, to which he said, "Surprise, Dad, I'm pregnant." So Target preempted the discussion. They were able to see changes in what she was buying and knew that she had entered that phase of her life. Mattel and Samsung have recently been in the news for products that have privacy-related concerns. Mattel is launching a new Barbie that listens to and records what a child says to it, sends it to the cloud for digitizing, and then provides individual responses to the child. The new Samsung TVs can listen in on every conversations that occur around it for marketing and advertising purposes if the voice activation feature of the remote control is utilized. So if you say, "I like donuts, I really like donuts," you would be surprised to see your TV. That's where you go get donuts. Right, that's a little personal relation. What I would say around my TV. So my question is, will we exchange our privacy for these types of services or not, or will we see them as invasions of privacy? Kansas State University recently came out with a new social media policy that essentially says, faculty, be careful what you say about our institution through social media.
Wow.
We can and will fire you if you say anything derogatory. So colleges are grappling with issues of oversight and regulation of faculty free speech and social media. The third area is governmental and political arena. There's tons of privacy-related applications and issues in this area. The article on the page by the Daily Republic in California contends that issues of privacy regulation are things that both Democrats and Republicans can get on board with. The NPR on the media story discusses how the NSA and Snowden have changed the way that we think about governmental tracking and issues of privacy regulation. Just think about what you've seen in the media the last couple of weeks and how there's almost a weekly leak of some sort of information about the Trump administration, stuff that we're not potentially supposed to know. The three stories in the middle show how candidates and governmental officials have a lower expectation of privacy than the general public. Recall during the election, this last election cycle, all the discussion about Hillary Clinton and her emails, right? I heard one more story about that. I'm like, I'm over the emails. And who can forget the bartender who video recorded Mitt Romney's speech to a private group of donors where he alienated 47% of the population and crushed any chance that he might have of being the Republican nominee for president. Finally, on the far right, we have some articles about how in the law enforcement arena, there's increased regulation of what officers do and say in the field. They're required, many cities require their officers now to wear body cams. And some of the more advanced ones now are incorporating artificial intelligence into these devices. They collect tons and tons of data that someone has to sift through. How do you make sense of it? And I wonder, how do these devices impact what people say, do, and if they're willing to provide the same on-the-scene accounts that they might otherwise not give if they might give or not give if they were being taped. All right, the health and the healthcare arena. Doctors, medical practitioners, patients, and medical education is grappling now with issues related to a system that highly values personal protection and privacy, with a whole new crop of health personnel that are more open, disclosive, and public about their private lives. So the article from the New York Times on the far right discusses how doctors and nurses are provided cell phones for their work that they do, and how blurry the lines can be with professional versus personal uses of these devices. Some health officials post pics of people on their social media sites and say things like, "This one that came into the ER last night was a hot mess." Or they even discuss their patients in specific ways that concern hospital administrators. The article on the bottom left discusses the ethics of healthcare personnel seeking out additional information through Google about the people that they treat. What happens when information that a doctor finds out about a patient through Google contradicts what they might discover or is freely shared in the patient consultation? The article above this questions if any of this type of information discovered through social media should factor into clinical treatment practices. Finally, the article on the bottom right and in the middle talk about how social media use is related to personal health issues and how more wearable health technologies like our Apple Watches, I've got mine here, right, collect all sorts of health information about us. And the issue then is in data and privacy concerns. How might that data be aggregated and used down the road by healthcare providers to limit the amount of services that we get or what things cost? Much can be said about the mediated and mass communication area of privacy-related implications, and most of what I've been talking about today could also filter under this area of focus. The two articles on the far left highlight how use of social media can result in getting fired from a job. The cluster of articles in the middle reflects issues of privacy related to specific social media platforms. Much has been written about how the social media application Snapchat provides a false sense and expectation of privacy protection. Facebook has been in the news quite a bit with their automatic facial recognition technology. The company can do quite a bit of individual tracking if it so desires, and it does. The article on the bottom right tells us that. The last two articles in the upper right-hand corner speak to personalization of news versus the protection of privacy. Do you want your news aggregator, like Google, Yahoo, or MSN, learning about you and perhaps your political and ideological preferences, and then providing you stories that just reflect your biases? This is what some of the most dominant algorithms currently do. Would you believe me if I said that all of these 5 clusters of issues that we just highlighted, some of the current debates, could be explored from a consistent theoretical framework? Well, it can. CPM theory notes that there are 3 parts to the privacy management process. There are issues for us to consider of privacy ownership, privacy control, and privacy turbulence. CPM is a systems-based theory, meaning that it tries to describe and explain all of the issues that factor into how people manage and regulate their private information. To understand the theory, we have to begin with how the theory defines private information. For this, and to see an application of a type of a media-related privacy breakdown, let's turn to Sheldon and Penny, 2 of my favorites, from the Big Bang Theory, and see what they have to say about it.
Here is a hot beverage to comfort you. It's in a to-go cup. Make of that what you will.
Come on, it's still early. Let's do something.
Well, I have been toying around with an idea for 4D chess.
How about we just talk?
All right. In 4D chess.
No. Well, let's talk about our lives. Tell me something about you I don't know.
I own 9 pairs of pants.
Okay, that's a good start, but I was thinking maybe something a little more personal.
I see. I own 9 pairs of underpants.
How about I go first?
But I don't want to know how many underpants you own. Although based on the floor of your bedroom, I'd say it's 1,000.
Okay, look, here's something people do not know about me. When I first moved out to LA, I did a topless scene in a low-budget horror movie about a killer gorilla. Oh, after I did it, I felt so ashamed. Thankfully, that thing never came out.
I've seen that. Serial apist. Howard found it online the day we met.
Oh.
I mean, it was literally the moment you walked out the door. But I see the type of personal revelations you're going for. Okay, here's one I thought I'd take to the grave. A while back, YouTube changed its user interface from a star-based rating system to a thumbs-up rating system. I tell people I'm okay with it, but I'm really not.
That's your big revelation?
Yes. I feel 10 pounds lighter.
Okay, you know what? I give up. I'm going to bed.
Hey, here's something else you don't know about me. You just hurt my feelings.
What did I do?
I opened up and shared something deeply upsetting to me, and you treated it as if it were nothing.
I didn't think it was a big deal.
It is to me. That's the point.
Sheldon, you are right. I'm really sorry. I should have known better.
Your apology is accepted.
Thank you. How about a hug?
How about a hearty handshake?
Come on.
Now I know how you felt, getting mauled by that sex-crazed gorilla.
All right. So we learned from this clip that private information is anything that makes someone feel some level or degree of vulnerability or sensitivity. We know it's private because when people feel vulnerable about what they mark as private, they begin to manage it and construct rules about who can know what about it and under what circumstances. So CPM theory is also a dialectical theory, meaning that it explains how people reside along this continuum of being either extremely open and public to completely closed and private. Disclosure is the process that helps us understand how people move along this dialectic. On one extreme, you have people who achieve more sociability and interactivity at the expense of individual control over private information. On the other extreme, you have people who retain more individual control over private information at the expense of being social or interactive. You can have all the privacy you'd ever want in the world as you lived as a hermit under a rock. Yet we all fluctuate along this continuum at different times in our life, in response to different issues, and for different reasons. The first part of the theory contends that we can understand how people think about private information if we use a boundary metaphor. When people do not want to share private or sensitive information, it resides in what we call an individual privacy boundary. The thinner circle for the man on the left signifies that he's more willing to be open and reside more on the private end of the dialectic than the public, or the public than the private. We look at the woman who's got a thicker boundary around her, signifying that she wishes to mark more information as private and secret. When people open up their individual privacy boundaries and share something with someone else, it transitions into what's called a collective privacy boundary. It's no longer up to their own unique control, but a mutual obligation with someone else to determine rules about who can know what about that information. It gets transitioned into the mutually co-owned space. So the theory notes that people control information in these different types of boundaries through rules that they utilize. In deciding whether or not personally to open up, things like gender, culture, context, risk-benefit ratio calculations, and individual motivations all come into play in understanding choices that happens. Once people move information into a collective privacy boundary, it's further controlled by the dyad or group by coming to agreement on who can exert more individual control over that information, who else can know it, and what type of information can and can't be shared with others. The theory notes that when all of this is effectively managed, it works seamlessly. We don't see anything, we don't think about it, and it's flawless. But more often than not, we have breakdowns in the management of our private information. So the theory incorporates this concept of privacy turbulence for us to see when people don't clearly meet our expectations, or we do not specify clearly enough what they should do with private information that's co-owned. And when this happens, people often rely on their own individual rules versus something that might be jointly or mutually negotiated between people. It's through experiencing privacy breakdowns that we know how privacy rules need to be adjusted to get back to a state of equilibrium and balance. So what I've done over the last 10 years is apply this theoretical framework about the management of private information to the context of social media. I'd like to explore 3 areas related to that work that I myself and others have put forward and what we know. First, I'll talk a little bit about some social media foundations, then some relationships between privacy management and other variables in the social media context, and then we'll end by looking at a couple of contexts where there's a little bit more research than others. In some of my earliest work, I started to deal with how to measure the CPM-based principles and examine how people construct individual versus collective privacy rules in the context of social media. I've always been more interested in the disclosure process and privacy rules through a range of different social media platforms rather than one specific site, and that's because they continue to evolve and change where people choose to interact. When I began doing this research, the dominant platforms, or maybe places you haven't even heard of anymore, were sites like MySpace, Blogger, Zynga. When I also began doing social media privacy research, 95% of my young adult samples would indicate that their parents knew nothing to very little about what they did and who they interacted with through mediated communication channels. And then this is largely because it wasn't born out of their generation. So in my early research, I was able to provide more evidence that speaks to headlines like some of these listed here. So this one suggesting that privacy is dead today. Actually, it's not. We know that people regulate what they disclose and share and take back content all the time through social media. There's a lot of variation in user activity along the privacy continuum that we just talked about. Other articles and talk shows from the NPR contend that we're delusional to think we have any privacy online. This is actually not at all that accurate. The research supports that people disclose and open up their privacy boundaries more online than they would face-to-face, but that people regulate the management of that information in the same types of mechanisms and rules outlined in CPM research that has predominantly occurred in face-to-face communication. So when people say things like privacy is dead online or there's no such thing as privacy today, what usually is the case is that someone from an older generation is looking at someone from a younger generation and really noticing generational differences in disclosure and privacy management behaviors. We do know from the evidence that different age groups and people with more or less technological experience manage privacy online differently, and so much that older generations tend to enact variability of privacy rules much further to the private side of the continuum in the public-private dialectic. And the younger adults tend to be more on the public side, but both groups have variation within these groups. My dad's a great story of this. He would come to me early on and be like, I want to know what's going on with social media, but I don't want to be on there. I don't want to have my own site. So he'd ask me, will you look up what this person said? Will you look up this? And I was his conduit for a while. Until one time I said, Dad, no more. You're coming with social media. So we got him all set up, got him on his account, but older generations do very different things than younger generations do. Most of his friends were my other siblings. And we noticed that Dad got on social media maybe about once a week. And we knew the time because we would have everything that had happened from the week that would get liked and maybe a comment on one of our posts. Dad's done his weekly download and digest, right? He's moving on. All right, so privacy and social media relationships. So with some of these foundational studies giving a pretty good framework and ability to use different measures, I began to explore the range of ways that individual differences in communication dispositions impact how people regulate and manage private information through social media. In this era, my work began to shift a greater focus on Facebook since it's continued to climb in adoption and use, but I also examined disclosure on different types of blog sites. I also began to provide more in-depth understanding of how people take back private information that they have disclosed when they feel too vulnerable and that their privacy has been compromised through social media. This work allows us deeper insight about headlines noting things like Facebook users aren't really bragging online. We're able to see more how individual user characteristics and communication dispositions matter in terms of understanding how people regulate what they say online. We established that how much self-monitoring an individual does in face-to-face communication carries over into how much or how little of that they do when discussing and interacting with others online. Articles today also note that Facebook users shy away from sharing all of their private information through social media. Well, another thing that I was able to do in this era of my work was to establish more nuances to these types of headlines and show that individual motivations, such as being more self-centered, being more concerned with consequences, being more thoughtful and planned out, being more interested in sharing or protecting behaviors, all of these dispositions impact how much regulation of private information people engage in online. These same personality dispositions are also impacted in how people decide to recalibrate their privacy rules and delete content and take information down. The top reasons why people identified in a qualitative and some quantitative work, follow-up work that we did on deletion tendencies, reveals that people reclaim more of their private information on social media to manage conflict with others, to assert greater personal identity and safety protection, to prevent forms of retribution, such as getting sued, to assert greater employment security, to gain greater impression management control, to regulate emotions more effectively, and for relational cleansings. In the family context, evidence suggests that there's been dramatic change over time in how family members interact through social media. In the initial developing phases of social media, there was very little family interaction. But today, young adults note that they have no issues with allowing their siblings, their parents, their grandparents, and their friends to all be commingled and be a part of their Facebook networks. They tend to not scrub content before allowing such family-based linkages to occur, and they also don't put family members into limited groups where they can't have full access to, by and large, to stuff that's going on in their lives. Research also supports that when family interaction and privacy management culture is more open and disclosive, there's more sharing online in conjunction with that orientation between family members. When family members are more secretive, there's less of this that occurs through social media. Young adult family members share the most private information on social media with their siblings, than their parents, and the least with their grandparents. Young adults also provide the most privacy socialization messages about presenting breakdowns on social media to their grandparents. And I think this is really interesting, so we see a reverse trend here, that when we're little, our parents and our grandparents teach us what to say, what not to say. You can't say these things when people come over to the house, right? And now, later in life, young adults are providing that same socialization about what you can and can't say, how long your posts need to be and not, how to manage settings of privacy with an older generation. And I think that's really neat, that we see this sort of bi-directional way of helping people learn norms about privacy management. Finally, evidence suggests that when parents and children interact with one another on Facebook over time through experimental methodologies, relational satisfaction increases and conflict decreases. So what does all this mean? I think there's lots of different implications from this area overall, but one that I see is that sharing and managing private information through Facebook and social media with family members serves as a way to strengthen family ties. In the mediated mass area, we know that people regulate how much private information they share to cultivate a specific type of identity that they wish to be more dominant on their mediated site. We also know that people sometimes overshare our private information and preempt our own ability to control the dissemination of it with others, like others that might announce a birthday party or a pregnancy or things like that before a couple or someone has the opportunity to do it themselves or a death, or some examples. People respond to both unintentional and intentional privacy breakdowns in social media, and that impacts how the choices that people make, whether they mark it as intentional or unintentional. We know that some people don't feel like they have a choice to not engage in sharing some sort of private information with an online audience. Thus, peers and friends often pull those without a digital footprint online to activity and surveillance of social media so that a fictitious identity isn't created instead. It's amazing to me how mean kids can be to other kids. We know that college students see it as inappropriate for instructors to send students Facebook friend requests. If such interconnected privacy boundaries occur, it should be the students who initiate these requests. And there are a host of other studies that shape our understanding of personal interaction through mediated communication channels. In the organizational context, we know that workplace privacy culture influences if people feel cautious or free to interact with their colleagues and peers through social media. In organizations where there's more of a secretive culture, there is less coworker leakage and sharing of private information that occurs. We also know that people who like who they work with more are more likely to have those linkages be a part of their friendship networks and to interact with them more privately. So we also know that some people worry about the merging of their personal versus their professional lives and environments through social media, and so they choose to differentiate and use sites like LinkedIn and Facebook to cultivate unique identities. One other interesting finding about privacy management within organizations come from Metzger, who early on found that people often want the perks that organizations will provide for exchange of private information, but they don't want to give up their privacy. And so people make up fictitious identities all the time and give untrue addresses and information so that they can get coupons and other free things that organizations might give away without compromising their privacy. All right, the last area. So I want to close this keynote and talk a little bit about what I think is on the horizon in terms of future research related to privacy, disclosure, and digital communication. I love using the iceberg imagery because I think there's so little that's been done overall that connects an understanding of disclosure and privacy issues through digital communication channels. I'd like to draw attention to 3 areas that I think might be important and vital in future research. The first area is newer communication technologies and exploring relatively newer applications like Snapchat, Whisper, and Yik Yak. One of the issues that immediately comes to mind is how these applications offer the illusion of privacy, but the applications are vulnerable to the images or content sent through the company's servers being stored. Thus, participants get the illusion of privacy and control, and perhaps in ways where they send content that's more vulnerable and that then becomes compromised. With the multiple range of devices that people use today, I wonder if it is even an appropriate assumption to make that a vanishing message can exist. The second type of application that I think needs more research is Yik Yak. Have you guys heard of Yik Yak in this room? Okay. One thing that's interesting about it is that it allows us to see what happens when people confuse privacy for anonymity. Being private isn't the same as being anonymous. So what's happened is that in many junior high schools, they've ended up banning this application because students would gossip and share hurtful messages and untrue content about others within that same environment. The application, because it removes the dimension of having a clear owner for private information that gets shared, results in a lot of negativity and unethical communication. We ought to be paying attention to that and researching that. The second area that I think needs more investigation is the health context and issues of privacy, disclosure, and health organizations. Examining differences in personal versus professional privacy and social media practice could help guide more successful reductions and breakdowns of privacy management among this new generation of doctors and medical officials that are grappling with the institution that wants them to be private when they tend to be more open in some of their personal lives. Finally, exploring the interrelationships between privacy and disclosure behavior and privacy law in society deserves further attention and research. I'm consistently asked by reporters to talk about differences in privacy regulation between the United States and Europe. Europe has higher individual expectations for privacy ownership and protection of private information among its citizens. It would be interesting to see how differences in laws impact disclosure and social media use in our interconnected society. I don't think we even have a good understanding of how different cultures beyond the US make decisions and are influenced in what they choose to share or not share. A lot of the research is still pretty US-centric. I'm also curious to see if we will continue this trend of being a surveillance society. I wonder if we will experience a backlash with people starting to erect more privacy protection zones, where individuals must disconnect from their digital devices and feel like they can exhale and be off the record again. I want to thank you for letting me be a part of your Communication Week 2017 and providing my Missouri statement, an opportunity to explore with you all today what I see as some of the intersections between privacy and disclosure in our daily lives and what implications it has for us now and in the future